The Hanoi campaign has done much to bring this subject to world attention in a way that we hope tells Hanoi and its communist allies that their treatment of our men does not pass muster in the community of nations.
Those who are held in Southeast Asia and their families know that they are not forgotten today. And I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, we will not let them down.
The statements and comments about concern of the prisoners has increased with this administration. And yet the solution to returning the prisoners has come no closer. And the point that I feel so strongly about and concerned about is that there's been great hopes and expectations built upon the wives and the children and the families of the prisoners.
I knew he was going to war, and I knew he could have been killed, but somehow I had never really thought about him as a prisoner. And that was July of 1965. And at that time, I had high hopes that by Christmas he would be home. Well, now it's almost 6 years later, and I, at this time, have less hope that he'll be home for Christmas. I just keep busy. And the hopes get slimmer that he's there.
The anguish and suffering of the prisoners' families, the conduct of the campaign of concern, the controversy over the POWs as an issue, and the prospects for release of the men in the camps. These are the subjects of our broadcast tonight.
This is the second of two CBS reports. The POWs, Pawns of War, with CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. Last Tuesday night, in the first of these two CBS reports, we looked at the American prisoners of war as human victims of the cruel and continuing war in Indochina. Tonight, we will examine the massive public campaigns to get the prisoners better treatment and to get them out. Some 25 months ago, President Nixon decided to make an international issue of the Americans held by the enemy in Indochina, reversing President Johnson's policy of quiet diplomacy to try to free them. Until early this month, the president placed ever-increasing emphasis on the POWs. Over and over again, he has said he would not pull all troops out of Indochina until the prisoners are freed. But Mr. Nixon also has said he would not leave until the Saigon regime has a reasonable chance to survive. Now, the war critics in Congress have seized upon the POW issue themselves and have turned the administration's argument around. Set a withdrawal date, they say, with the only condition being the other side's agreement to free the prisoners. And they are now hitting the prisoner issue hard. Hanoi, too, recognizes the emotional impact of the POWs. Just last week in Paris, Le Duc Tho, a member of the North Vietnamese Politburo, said it is the desire of the Vietnamese people to see all the captured soldiers return home as soon as possible. Nevertheless, on that same day, Hanoi repeated its refusal even to discuss releasing the prisoners until after a withdrawal deadline is set. If nothing else, the public campaign has taken advantage of North Vietnam's sensitivity to world opinion about how it treats the captives. This sensitivity became apparent at the end of 1968, even before the public campaign began, when Hanoi abruptly changed the image it wanted the world to see, a movement away from the harsh line which had dominated its propaganda. Mayo is just one example of that change. The receipt of Mayo was made a propaganda ceremony by North Vietnam, as in this 1968 Christmas film approved by Hanoi. The intended image, compassionate captor, but the compassion was questionable. This letter to a Navy lieutenant commander had been mailed 9 months earlier by his wife. Lieutenant Commander Richard Stratton of Hanford, California, and Lieutenant Commander Hugh Stafford of Cambridge, Maryland. This was the first film of American POWs receiving Mayo, a reflection of Hanoi's changed public attitude toward the prisoners, and many of the letters contained snapshots. Stratton's wife, Alice, enclosed a photograph of their 3 boys, the youngest of whom doesn't remember his father. A few words bridging a distance halfway around the world. Major Roger Ingleson of Sanford, Maine. Even the presence of the camera and the certain knowledge that he and this moment are being used for propaganda could not mask his reaction to a letter from home. The exchange of mail has substantially increased since the administration made the prisoners a public issue. But in that 2-year period, only 6 Americans have been released, 3 by North Vietnam and 3 by the Viet Cong. In that same period, another 300, by the Pentagon's own figures, have been added to the list of the war's missing or captured. The most spectacular gesture of the administration's concern for the prisoners has been a commando strike inside North Vietnam to rescue POWs. A helicopter-borne team of 101 Air Force and Army volunteers raided the Son Tay camp 23 miles west of Hanoi last November 20th. The venture freed not a single prisoner. There were none in the camp, but the administration hailed it as a success. And the president, who had personally approved the attempt, personally decorated some of the participants. And Son Tay, like other aspects of the campaign to focus attention on the POWs, became itself a focus of controversy. Defense Secretary Laird appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I want this committee to know that I have not faced a more challenging decision since I have been Secretary of Defense. I concluded that there was no acceptable alternative than to recommend that the volunteer force, now highly trained and well-rehearsed for its humanitarian mission, should be authorized to make a valiant attempt to save their fellow Americans.
I think there's no man in the Senate or anywhere else who is not deeply sympathetic with the prisoners of war. But unfortunately, this kind of a conflict involves many other people. We have lost some 50,000 dead. And we're continuing to lose large numbers. We're not questioning the heroism of the people involved, nor your motives in doing it. We all share your desire to release these prisoners, to obtain their release. But there are many of us feel that the only practical way, in view of the long history, is to bring the war to a conclusion.
This month, Secretary Laird was asked if he still thought the Son Tay raid was a good idea.
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me why?
Well, I would authorize similar activities as Secretary of Defense and recommend them when they have a chance for success. And I felt that this had a 50-50 chance for success as far as returning prisoners. And any search and rescue missions that have that degree of success available, and I believe that the men that are involved can be returned safely and return home, I certainly would recommend it. I am concerned about the plight of these prisoners of war. This is a humanitarian issue.
The intelligence reports, which came out with congressional investigation, showed that our military knew that there weren't any prisoners in there 18 hours before the raid. So for what purposes were the raid taken? To try, I think, to build up a greater sense of hope and expectation among a lot of Americans, particularly the families of the prisoner of war. That was a sham.
David Culhane made a sampling of the prisoners' families. He found that they looked back on Son Tay with reservations.
Son Tay? Well, it boosts our morale a little bit to think at least, they do care. They really do care. And if they'd gotten prisoners out, it would have been an entirely different situation.
My first reaction was, thank God they've finally done something. My second reaction was, what a horrible thought that they must resort to attempting this.
I thought it was dreadful to send men in on
on a cause that was lost before it even began. There were no prisoners there.
It frightened me because I would hate to think that this is how we must get our men out of the camps. I hope we can find a better way. I just can't believe that they could, had the men been there, that they would have gotten many of them out alive. It proved one thing to me, that we're pretty desperate as to how we're going to get those men out if we would attempt such a mission. I think the men who went in on the mission were marvelously brave, and I'm certainly grateful to them for risking their lives. But I hope that we will not attempt another such rescue.
Some of the campaign of concern for the POWs, here and abroad, has been organized and orchestrated by the administration. Some has been spontaneous and local. The latest activity, undertaken with White House backing, is a $25 million global print and TV ad campaign to start next month. It is sponsored and underwritten by the Advertising Council, the ad industry's organization for public service causes. However, it has drawn some opposition within the industry as being politically motivated. Frederick Pappert, the head of one major agency, has made public letters of protest against the campaign, saying no one thinks the prisoners themselves would gain anything from it. The ad campaign is just one outgrowth of the president's major policy shift on the POWs, the May 1969 decision to, quote, go public on the issue. The widening campaign of concern for the prisoners has taken many forms in the past 2 years.
For example, big parades. This one in Torrance, California on Armed Forces Day last month. For example, small-town fairs. This one in Brea, California this month. High school students adopted missing Marine Captain Steve Hansen as their rallying symbol. Hansen, a helicopter pilot and former high school coach, was shot down in Laos on June 3, 1967, and has not been heard from since. The halftime ceremonies of last season's Army-Navy football game became a platform for a POW appeal by Joan Vincent, who heads the leading group of families of the prisoners and missing men. She was accompanied by Admiral Thomas Moorer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and heroes of the Sante prison raid, which took place just a week earlier. Since William Howard Taft in 1910, presidents of the United States traditionally have thrown out the first ball of the baseball season, but there have been exceptions. One this year when President Nixon sent a substitute, announced by the Secretary of Defense.
For 4 long years, Sergeant Pitzer was a prisoner of the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. As he performs this American ritual of throwing out the first ball, he does so as a reminder that there are still a great many men in uniform, some 1,600 of them who have not seen a ball game in a long time.
Gentlemen, last September 22nd, a joint meeting of Congress assembled to hear Colonel Frank Borman, the astronaut, report on a 25-day global visit to 14 nations he undertook for President Nixon in behalf of the prisoners.
I request that all of you, some way, every day, remember the people, the U.S. citizens who are prisoners, and I strongly beg you not to forsake your countrymen who have given so much for you.
If Congress passes a resolution to have all men withdrawn by the end of the year, then we've lost the last concession that we have available to utilize for those men.
Lieutenant Robert Frischman, one of the POWs released by Hanoi, now president of Concern for Prisoners of War Incorporated. Still on active Navy duty, he campaigns in uniform for the captives and on behalf of U.S. Vietnam policy. This was a dinner for POWs in Los Angeles this month. Another speaker was Governor Ronald Reagan.
We're not given to bellicose saber-rattling or unnecessary belligerence. But the savage captors of our young men must be made to know that each one of those men is particularly precious to all of us, that there will be no peace until they are restored to their families. The President has said as much. It is now up to the rest of us to make it unmistakably clear to the enemy that he spoke what is in the heart of each one of us, and make it plain to the enemy that if the price for peace is even one young American, that price we will not pay.
As part of the POW campaign, the Post Office issued a special commemorative stamp. Perhaps fitting, for the biggest activity in behalf of the prisoners has been letter writing. Hundreds of groups like these school children have participated in Write Hanoi campaigns. Millions of letters have been written. One such campaign is being run now by the Reader's Digest. The magazine announced it last month with this newspaper advertisement across the country. Bob Schieffer asked Editor-in-Chief Hobart Lewis about the response.
We're getting a tremendous response from the American public. And we are publishing an article in our international editions next month, and we hope the same response will come from the world.
What are you advising people to do?
We're asking people to write directly to the North Vietnamese embassy or to the president of North Vietnam in Hanoi, urging them to treat the American prisoners humanely. And we hope very much that by putting pressure, volume of mail, putting pressure on the president of North Vietnam, that there'll be some response.
The American Red Cross is handling the Write Hanoi letters for the Reader's Digest, as it has for other organizations. Critics have called this activity political, but the Red Cross calls it humanitarian and defends it as a legitimate public relations effort to aid the prisoners. Bob Schieffer talked with Red Cross Senior Vice President Ramon Eaton about the effect of the letters.
Do you have any proof that these coupons are being received by the North Vietnamese, or in fact that anybody is reading them in North Vietnam?
We have considerable proof that the mass of letters, and these will only be, of course, a part of what's been going on now for 16, 17 months, are, of course, being received in Hanoi. There's no question about that. And natural curiosity and concern, if nothing more, indicates that these letters are opened.
Eaton's confidence to the contrary, there is evidence that much mail goes unread, indeed, even unreceived. The Hanoi delegation in Paris regularly refuses to accept it, and the letters are turned away, ultimately to wind up in a warehouse basement, rented by a California POW organization as a dead letter office. Now, according to CBS News correspondent Peter Kalischer, who looked into the situation, the letters arrive in bulk packages addressed directly to the warehouse, there to join the tons more already gathering dust. It isn't only mail that comes to Paris for the POWs. The most publicized and intensive individual effort in their behalf has been that of Ross Perot and his United We Stand organization. The Texas computer billionaire has made the POWs his personal crusade and spent $3 million on it. On chartered jetliners, Perot has taken prisoner families and journalists on 3 trips abroad.
How long are you going to stay here?
Failing to get permission to visit POW camps in North Vietnam, Perot visited POW camps in the South to demonstrate that they were open and the prisoners well cared for. The camps were open to Perot, but they have not been to CBS News, which has been requesting permission to enter for the last 3 months. From South Vietnam, Perot went to Dien Bien, to the North Vietnamese embassy in Laos, only to be turned away at the door.
We did not see the Charge d'Affaires, as has been the custom in our prior meetings here. We told the North Vietnamese to bet with us to deliver our message to the Charge d'Affaires And we had information on approximately 8,000 North Vietnamese regular troops that we knew he would be vitally interested in. But we had about 2 hours of film that would show the North Vietnamese firsthand how these men are being treated.
Perot's crusade also reached directly into the capital of the United States. A Perot POW exhibit designed to represent the captive's plight. I asked Perot what he thought he had achieved.
My objective has been to gain the release of the men. I've not yet achieved that objective. So as I mention these other things, let me say I never lost sight of what I started to do, and I haven't done that. Measuring along the way, though, signs of progress that indicate that the North Vietnamese do, in fact, respond to pressure, let's look at what's happened. In January 1970, the North Vietnamese took the keys away from the guards. Most prison brutality stopped within days after the American people first focused their attention on these men. In January 1970, and since that time, the food and the medical treatment given to prisoners has improved dramatically. 80% of the mail that's come out of the prison camps has come out since the American people got involved. Morale in the camps was terrible in 1967, 1968. Now, morale in the camps is much better because these men know that the wives that the North Vietnamese tell them repeatedly have forgotten them, have not forgotten them, but instead have gone all over the world in efforts to gain their release.
The wives' travels to gain their release included this trip last month to Switzerland. A delegation of 173 POW relatives went to Geneva, where 43 countries were represented at an International Red Cross meeting on the Geneva Convention. Peter Kalischer asked them their purpose.
We hope to have people understand that many of the Geneva Conventions are not being upheld, and that we wish the prisoner of war situation could be made better. The purpose of the trip is to try to get the International Red Cross and then the other countries and the other embassies to support us in our efforts to try and find out something, information, anything that we can find out about the people that are missing or the prisoners. Just anything we can do for some more support that would maybe help us in some way to find out anything.
Anything that we can do to further the world opinion with respect to these men's plight means a step forward. We've tried many, many things, and we would do most anything to attempt to secure some new information or release.
Doing most anything included standing outside the site of the peace talks in Paris, where the prisoner issue was on the agenda for the 114th session. Hanoi's delegate Xuan Thuy arrived, but the presence of the families accomplished little. Nothing happened at the session to speed the return of the POWs. Nevertheless, the effort goes on, much of it directed from Washington, out of offices donated by the American Legion to an organization called the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia. Bob Schieffer talked with National Coordinator Joan Vinson, whose own husband is missing.
Has any of this activity had any effect, do you think, on the North Vietnamese?
Well, I very definitely think that it has had effect because up until December of last year, only 100 men had ever been heard from. Now, 339 men are identified by the North Vietnamese, which is some progress, and they are letting reporters into North Vietnam and have photographed a few of the men, and it does appear that the few that have been photographed, that their conditions have improved, because, 3 years ago, they were parading the men through the streets of Hanoi, calling them war pirates or criminals, and threatening to try them as war criminals. Now, we see pictures of them playing basketball, strumming on a guitar, being interviewed. So I think that, in that way, that their conditions have improved, at least, as I said, of the ones that we have seen photographed.
We get reports from some of the families, and I'm interested to know if you also get reports. But some of them are becoming disillusioned because both sides seem to be using the prisoners as political pawns. Do you, in fact, get reports like that?
Yes. I get the families are very upset. They, feel that they have been true and loyal through these many years, and that the men have been, and it has been, 7 years for some men to have been prisoners, and for their families, to have lived all this period of time. they are extremely upset, and you know, they just wonder how much longer the men can survive.
I've related to the President, frankly, a number of times that there's a change in attitude among the families of prisoners of war and missing in action.
Senator Robert Dole, Republican National Chairman, is sometimes a spokesman for, always a supporter